Hello everyone, today we are going to introduce the India economy. The rapid development of the India economy can be seen in the video. With the development of the India economy, the people's living standards have improved significantly.
To really get a grasp of how India has developed into the country that it has become, we must first talk about its history. India was always prevalent in trading as it had valuable resources, such as spices and textiles. But as seen in the graph, after the 1700s, their share in GDP went down drastically. This is due to the British East India Company. To really get into how the company affected India, we will go into its history too. In the late 1500s, British merchants asked and were granted permission to start trading in India. Now we'll fast forward a little bit to the early 1600s, and they had started their company, which was the British East India Company. At the time, they had a pretty hard start, as many other nations were in India too, such as the Dutch and the Portuguese, and they also had to deal with the Mughal Empire. The company slowly began to grow and started taking over certain trade markets. Luckily for them, as they were growing, the Mughal Empire began to fall, and the British, seeing this as an opportunity, fought against the remaining Mughal leaders in India. Now, seeing that India had no leadership system set up, the British East India Company took over. This was the start of their empire. This went completely against what they were granted permission to do, though, and it started to get noticed from the Queen. And once it was found out what the British East India Company was doing and how much power they had obtained, the British government took the company over. But by this time, the company was a former shell of what it once was, and it had lost a lot of its power and a lot of its share in the market.
I'm going to talk about the absence of industrialization in India. Historians have questioned why India failed to industrialize in the 19th century, as the global cotton industry underwent a technological revolution in the 18th century, while Indian industry stagnated after adopting the flying shuttle, and industrialization began only in the late 19th century. Several historians have suggested that this was because India was still a largely agricultural nation with low commodity money wage levels, arguing that nominal wages were high in breeding, so cotton producers had an incentive to invent and purchase expensive new labor-saving technologies, and that wages level were low in India. So producers prefer to increase output by hiring more workers rather than investing in technology. Economic historians such as Prasanna Parthasarathi have criticized this argument, pointing to earnings data that show real wages in 18th century Bengal and Mysore were higher than in Britain. Instead, he argues that Indian textile prices were lower because of India's lower food prices, which was the result of higher agricultural productivity. Compared to Britain, the silver coin prices of grain were about one-half in Mysore and one-third in Bengal, resulting in lower silver coin prices for Indian textiles, giving them a price advantage in global markets. According to evidence cited by Irfan Harbi, that's the agricultural output and standards of consumption in 19th century Mughal India was higher than in 17th century Europe and early 20th century British India.
Debate continues about the economic impacts of British imperialism on India. This map shows the change in per capita GDP of India from 1820 CE to 2015 CE. All GDP numbers are inflation adjusted to 1990 International Economic Dollars. It is not difficult to find that under British rule, India's economic development was almost zero. The issue was first raised by Edmund Burke, who in the 1780s vehemently attacked the East India Company, claiming that Warren Hastings and other top officials had ruined the Indian economy and society. Indian historian Rajat Canterbury continued this line of reasoning, saying that British rule in the 18th century took the form of plunder and was a catastrophe for the traditional economy.
The Hindu rate of growth is a term referring to the low annual growth rate of the economy of India before the liberalization of 1991, which stagnated around 3.5% from 1950 to 1980, while per capita income growth averaged 1.3%. The term contrasts with South Korea's miracle on the Han River and the Taiwan miracle, while these Asian tigers had similar income level as India in 1950. Exponential economic growth since then has transformed them into developed countries today. Many claim that the economy of India accelerated and grew at a rate of around 6 to 9% since economic liberalization began in the 1990s. However, growth began accelerating in 1980. The word Hindu in the term was used by some earlier economists like Vikas Mishra, who is an economist, to imply that the Hindu outlook of fatalism and contentedness was responsible for the slow growth. Later economists reject this connection and instead attribute the rate to the government of the India's protectionist and interventionist policies, rather than to a specific religion or to the attitude of the adherents of a particular religion. Accordingly, some writers instead use the term Nehruvian socialism. As the table shows, in 1947, the average annual income in India was $439, compared with $690 for China, $770 for South Korea, and $936 for Taiwan. By 1990, the number were $1,818 for India, $3,259 for China, $13,317 for South Korea, and $15,720 for Taiwan. From the table, we can see that other countries grow much more than India. Noted politician and journalist Arun Shourie pointing out that the Hindu rate of growth was a result of socialist policies implemented by governments. Because of those very socialist policies that their kind had swallowed and imposed on the country, its growth was held down to 3 to 4%. It was to be with much glee as the Hindu rate of growth. In 1975, India's GDP was $545 billion, $1,561 billion in the USSR, $1,266 billion in Japan, and $3,500 $117 billion in the US. Before independence, a large share of tax revenue was generated by the land tax. Thereafter, land tax steadily declined as a share of revenues. The economy problems inherited at independence were exacerbated by the costs associated with the partition, which had resulted in about 2 to 4 million refugees fleeing past each other across the new borders between India and Pakistan. Refugees settlement was a considerable economic strain. Partition divided India into complementary economic zones. Under the British, jute and cotton were grown in the eastern part of Bengal, but processing took place mostly in the western part of Bengal, which became the Indian state of West Bengal. As a result, after independence, India had to convert land previously used for food production to cultivate cotton and jute. The graph shows GDP per capita of South Asian economies and South Korea as a percent of the American GDP per capita. Compare India, which the color is orange, with South Korea, the color is yellow. Both started from about the same income level in 1950. However, in 1995, India's GDP declined. The South Korea grew and increased much more than India and other countries.